Everything you've ever been taught about history is a carefully constructed lie. The colossal buildings that surround you every day, the structures they call masterpieces of modern civilization, were not built by our most recent ancestors. The official version tells us that 18th and 19th century humans, armed with hand hammers, wooden saws, and horse-drawn carts, created these architectural wonders. But that story conveniently omits one terrifyingly important detail. Look at the doors of those ancient buildings. They stand 3 times the height of a grown adult. The massive columns require 3 people to embrace. Windows begin at heights your arms cannot reach. Why would a normal civilization construct things incompatible with their own body proportions? Why does every detail seem designed for beings much larger than ourselves? And here's what's even more horrifying. From Buenos Aires to Kiev, from Pittsburgh to Frankfurt, these buildings appear with identical designs, identical proportions, identical styles, as if cast from the same forgotten template. Nations supposedly developing independently, constantly at war with each other, having no contact whatsoever, yet possessing structures identical down to the smallest detail. So who really built these cities? If not us, then who are we? And why has this truth been buried beneath layers of fabricated history? In this video, I will show you 3 undeniable pieces of evidence about a giant civilization that once existed, about stolen technology, and about why humanity was forced to forget its true past. Once you see what I'm about to reveal, you will never walk into an ancient building with the same thoughts again.
Let's begin by being fair. Let's look at what the official history actually tells us about these monumental buildings scattered across the globe. According to Orthodox history, the massive imperial structures we see worldwide were constructed during the 18th and 19th centuries by different civilizations working independently. Historians explain that the similarity in architectural styles resulted from the spread of the Renaissance and neoclassical movements from Europe. Architects trained in the same schools read the same books about ancient Roman and Greek architecture and therefore created similar structures. It sounds reasonable on the surface. As for the gigantic proportions, historians explain these as symbols of imperial power, church authority, and state dominance. Buildings were constructed on a grand scale to represent majesty, to make individuals feel small before the authority of religion or government. The message was clear: you are insignificant before these institutions. And regarding the technology, they tell us that people of that era possessed extraordinary skills. Thousands of workers labored for years with simple but effective hand tools. Stone was quarried manually, transported by horse and cart, lifted by wooden pulleys and rope systems, and precisely positioned through sheer determination and human ingenuity. We're told it was slow, laborious, but entirely possible. This is the version we've been taught to accept without question. But there are some peculiar things here that don't quite add up when you apply basic logic. First, let's talk about resources. To construct even a single building of this magnitude requires millions of tons of stone. Each individual block weighs between 5 and 50 tons. With the tools of that era, hand hammers, chisels, rope, and wooden pulleys, how exactly did they quarry these massive stones, transport them sometimes hundreds of miles, and install them with millimeter precision? The official answer is always the same: lots of people, lots of time. But is that really an answer? Second, consider the time frame. Some of these structures, according to official records, were completed in just 5 to 10 years. But if you calculate the actual workload, excavating foundations dozens of meters deep, placing thousands of multi-ton stone blocks, carving intricate details on every column and facade. With manual technology, this work should require at least 50 to 100 years, yet somehow they finished in a fraction of that time. How? Third, let's examine population numbers. Some cities recorded as having only tens of thousands of residents somehow possessed dozens of these monumental buildings. If nearly the entire population had to work continuously on construction, who grew the food? Who conducted trade? Who managed society? The mathematics simply don't work. A city of 30,000 cannot sustain the labor force required to build 200 massive structures in 50 years while simultaneously maintaining a functioning civilization. But the questions don't stop there. If these buildings were merely meant to display power, why construct doors 3 times human height? Why not build normal-sized doors but decorate them more lavishly? That would save resources, time, and make them actually functional for the people supposedly using them.
Yet every single one of these structures features oversized elements that seem designed for a different species altogether. If nations developed independently and were constantly at war with each other, how did they all adopt the exact same architectural standards down to the finest details? The height of columns, the dimensions of doors, the shape of domes, all identical whether you're in Argentina, Ukraine, the United States, or Germany. How did enemies share such precise architectural knowledge? And here's perhaps the most troubling question. If the technology of that era relied purely on human and animal power, why is it that later, in the early 20th century, when we supposedly had more advanced machinery, we became unable to construct buildings of similar complexity and precision? Why did our capabilities seem to decline rather than advance? But the biggest question of all, if they truly built these structures from the ground up, why isn't there a single photograph showing the excavation of foundations, the installation of massive stone blocks, or the erection of columns? Why do all existing photographs only show the final stages? People painting exteriors, installing decorative elements, standing on flimsy wooden scaffolding, leaning against already completed structures. These are not minor inconsistencies. These are fundamental contradictions that shake the entire narrative to its core. Every single one of these questions leads to the same uncomfortable conclusion. The official story doesn't hold up under scrutiny. It requires us to ignore mathematics, physics, and basic common sense. It asks us to believe in miracles while insisting everything was perfectly ordinary. And when a story requires you to abandon logic to believe it, that's not history. That's mythology. So if the official version cannot explain these contradictions, then we must look for a different explanation. We must follow the evidence, even if it leads us to conclusions that challenge everything we thought we knew. And that's exactly what we're going to do.
Now let's begin our investigation. Let's examine the evidence with the eyes of someone who's willing to see what's actually there, rather than what we've been told should be there. Start by looking at old photographs from the late 19th century. These images supposedly document the construction of these grand buildings, but when you examine them closely, something immediately strikes you as odd. The first thing you notice is that the building is already nearly complete. The walls are standing, the arches are formed, the columns are in position. Often, even the roof is already in place. What you're seeing is not construction from the ground up, you're seeing finishing work. So what are the people in these photographs actually doing? They're plastering exterior walls, they're painting window frames, they're installing small decorative elements. These are cosmetic tasks, not structural engineering. This is the work you do when a building already exists, not when you're creating it from nothing. Now look at the scaffolding.
It's made of thin wooden planks, merely leaning against the walls. This scaffolding is not structurally sound enough to lift multi-ton stone blocks. It's barely adequate to support a man with a paintbrush. Yet we're supposed to believe this same scaffolding system was used to hoist massive granite blocks 50 meters into the air and position them with surgical precision? It defies physics. And here's what's conspicuously absent from every single photograph: the heavy machinery. There are no metal cranes, no industrial rail systems for transporting stone, no lifting equipment of any substantial size, just a few horses, a few wooden carts, and crowds of people standing around posing for the camera. These aren't construction photographs. These are theatrical productions staged to create a false historical narrative. Let's compare modern construction with these ancient structures to understand the technological chasm between them. A modern wall is typically 20 to 30 centimeters thick, made from fired brick or concrete. It's simple, functional, sufficient to provide shelter from weather. Its purpose is honest and its construction straightforward. Now examine the walls of these old buildings. They're 1 to 2 meters thick, constructed from granite or limestone blocks, each weighing multiple tons. These blocks fit together without mortar with such precision that you cannot slide a knife blade into the gaps. The surfaces are so perfectly smooth and flat that achieving such tolerances would challenge even modern computer-guided cutting equipment. This type of wall is not merely for shelter, it serves a different structural purpose entirely: acoustic resonance, electrical insulation, withstanding powerful vibrations, or perhaps supporting some kind of energy system we no longer understand. Consider a specific example: Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. Official records state it was built between 1163 and 1345, a span of 182 years. Yet when it burned in 2019, modern engineers stated that rebuilding it with today's technology would take at least 40 years and cost billions of dollars. So how did medieval people with hand hammers accomplish in 182 years what we, with our advanced machinery, need 40 years just to replicate? Either they possessed technology far superior to ours, or they didn't build it at all. There's no middle ground here. Walk into any museum and you'll see the tools allegedly used to construct these monuments: stone hammers, bronze chisels, wooden saws, rope. Let's test this claim with basic mathematics. Practical experiments demonstrate that with these tools, a highly skilled craftsman can shape 1 ton of granite in approximately 6 months of continuous work. A typical monumental building contains roughly 10,000 such blocks. That's 60,000 years of labor for one person, or 600 years if you have 100 people working without rest. But the official story claims construction took only 10 years. The mathematics is impossible unless they possessed stone-cutting technology vastly more advanced than these simple tools suggest, technology for which we find no trace in the historical record. This isn't a minor discrepancy. This is the difference between myth and reality. When you read historical documents about the construction of these buildings, you encounter another peculiarity. They're remarkably vague about technical details. They tell you who designed the structure, they tell you who provided funding, they tell you when construction supposedly began and ended, but they never explain how a 30-ton block was lifted 50 meters into the air. They never describe the logistics of transporting stone from quarries hundreds of kilometers away. They never detail the engineering solutions to problems that would challenge modern civil engineers. It's as if someone wrote a recipe that lists ingredients and cooking time but omits every actual instruction. You're left with a story that sounds plausible until you try to replicate it, at which point you realize crucial information is missing. In some cases, written records about a building only appear decades after it was already standing, as if history was being written backwards, retrofitted to explain something that already existed.
Let's apply simple arithmetic to the city of Buenos Aires as a case study. In 1850, the population was approximately 90,000 people. By 1900, the city contained over 200 massive imperial buildings. If each building required 2,000 workers laboring for 10 years, that's a total of 400,000 person-years of labor. With a population of 90,000, of which perhaps 30,000 were working-age males, they would need to work continuously for 13 years, doing nothing but construction. No farming, no commerce, no other economic activity whatsoever. This scenario is economically impossible. A society cannot function if its entire workforce is dedicated solely to building monuments. Someone needs to produce food, manufacture goods, provide services. The numbers simply don't work unless those buildings were already there. When you expand the investigation globally, a clear pattern emerges that cannot be dismissed as coincidence. Pattern 1. Every major city worldwide experienced a simultaneous construction boom between 1850 and 1900. Not gradually over centuries, but nearly all at once, as if someone had flipped a switch. Pattern 2. Immediately following this boom, World's Fairs began appearing everywhere. At these fairs, entire temporary cities were supposedly erected from plaster and wood and then demolished after a few months. But photographs of these temporary structures show solid permanent buildings, indistinguishable from the ones that remained. This looks less like construction and more like a theatrical performance designed to legitimize the sudden appearance of pre-existing structures. Pattern 3. In numerous locations, these buildings are partially buried under 2 to 5 meters of mud and soil, the so-called mud flood phenomenon. Ground floor windows open directly into earth. Massive entrance doors are half submerged. This suggests a major geological event covered these structures, after which people excavated and repurposed them. Pattern 4. Early 20th century photographs show strangely empty streets. Few people, minimal activity, as if cities had just been resettled. Where are the crowds you'd expect in a thriving metropolis? Why do these urban centers look like stage sets waiting for actors to arrive? This pattern repeats across hundreds of cities on every continent. When you see the same sequence of events, sudden appearance of buildings, theatrical documentation, burial evidence, empty streets occurring simultaneously worldwide, you're no longer looking at isolated incidents. You're looking at a coordinated, systematic operation. And here's perhaps the most damning evidence of all, the technological regression. Look at photographs from the 1890s. You see electric streetcars gliding along tracks with no overhead wires, early electric automobiles, even devices resembling electric scooters. The streets are clean, the transportation is efficient and silent, powered by some form of wireless electricity that we're told didn't exist. Then, suddenly, just a few years later, those same streets are transformed. The electric vehicles vanish. In their place, horses, mud, primitive wooden carts. Society didn't advance, it regressed. A civilization that had mastered clean, efficient electric transportation voluntarily returned to animal power? That makes absolutely no sense unless something catastrophic happened. Unless the power source for that technology was deliberately shut down. This is not natural technological evolution. This is evidence of a great shutdown. Evidence that an advanced system was forcibly deactivated, rendering all technology dependent on it instantly obsolete. All of these pieces of evidence, the staged photographs, the impossible construction timelines, the missing technical documentation, the statistical impossibilities, the global patterns, the technological regression, they all point toward the same conclusion. These buildings were not constructed by 19th century humans using primitive tools. They were inherited, repaired, and rebranded.
The official history is not a record of what happened. It's a cover story designed to hide what really happened. And once you see this pattern, you cannot unsee it. The evidence is everywhere, hiding in plain sight, waiting for anyone willing to look without the filter of official narratives.
So now we arrive at the question that changes everything. If we didn't build these structures, who did? Based on all the evidence we've examined, I'm going to propose a hypothesis, not a proven fact, not an absolute truth, but a framework that explains what the official story cannot. Earth was once home to a unified global civilization, far more technologically advanced than anything we possess today. They built cities on a monumental scale with an energy system we've lost, free, wireless power drawn directly from the atmosphere and the Earth itself. The structures we now call cathedrals, churches, and temples were not houses of worship. They were power plants, sophisticated machines designed to capture, amplify, and distribute energy across vast distances. Look at their design through this lens, and everything makes sense. The domes function as resonators and energy concentrators. The tall spires and bell towers are antennae capturing atmospheric electricity. The metal crosses at their peaks are not religious symbols, but multi-directional terminals for receiving and discharging energy. The rose windows, with their precise geometric patterns, modulate sound and light frequencies. Every element serves a technical function in a unified system. This civilization built to a different scale because they were either physically larger than us or because these structures served technological purposes requiring massive proportions. The uniformity across continents wasn't cultural exchange, it was standardization, a global infrastructure built by a single advanced society operating under unified engineering principles. Then, sometime in the mid-19th century, something catastrophic happened. Whether it was natural disaster, technological warfare, or a deliberate reset event, this civilization was destroyed. Their cities were buried under layers of mud and earth, the mud flood. Their population was decimated or removed entirely. Their technology was shut down or lost. What followed was a resettlement operation. A new population, or perhaps survivors with diminished knowledge, moved into these abandoned cities. They cleared the streets, excavated the buildings, and repaired what they could. But they no longer understood the true purpose of these structures. The cathedrals became churches. The energy distribution network became religious institutions. Technology became ritual. And to legitimize this appropriation, a new history was written, a history claiming that these new inhabitants, or their recent ancestors, had built everything themselves. Staged photographs were taken, showing construction that was actually restoration. World's fairs displayed cleaned-up pre-existing buildings as if they were new creations, and then supposedly demolished them to hide the evidence. An elaborate theatrical performance designed to create continuity where none existed. This framework explains what the official version cannot. Why is architecture identical globally? Because it was built by one civilization, not many separate ones developing independently. Why are proportions so massive? Because the builders were different from us, or because these were industrial facilities, not residential or ceremonial spaces. Why are there no real construction photographs? Because there was no construction, only excavation, repair, and occupation of pre-existing structures. Why did electric technology appear and then vanish? Because the old energy grid was shut down or lost, replaced by a new centralized system that could be controlled and monetized. Why are buildings partially buried? Because a mud flood or similar catastrophic event covered them before they were excavated and reused. Why did everything happen simultaneously worldwide? Because the resettlement and historical fabrication were coordinated operations occurring across all continents at once. Every piece of evidence we examined,
the staged photos, the impossible timelines, the technological regression, the global patterns, fits coherently into this hypothesis in a way they never fit into the official story. This phenomenon is not limited to a few isolated cities. It appears across the entire planet. In North America, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., all show the same pattern. In South America, Buenos Aires, Rio de Janeiro, Lima, identical architecture, identical buried ground floors, identical evidence of sudden appearance. In Europe, Paris, London, Berlin, Vienna, St. Petersburg, the same imperial style repeated endlessly. In Asia, Bangkok, Manila, even certain regions of China and India, the monumental buildings appear, often incongruously, in cultures supposedly developing along completely different architectural traditions. In Australia, Sydney, Melbourne, cities that officially didn't exist 2 centuries ago, yet possess buildings that look centuries older and impossibly grand for such young settlements. This is not a regional peculiarity. This is a planetary phenomenon. And if a project of this scale existed, it required an organization with power and influence transcending any single nation or government. It required either the remnants of the old civilization maintaining some level of coordination, or a new global authority managing the resettlement and historical rewrite.
There are several possible scenarios for what actually happened, and I'm not claiming to know which is correct, but let's consider the most plausible options. Scenario 1. The old civilization destroyed itself through advanced warfare, perhaps using technologies we can barely imagine, and the survivors lost most of their knowledge. They became the new population, but with collective amnesia or deliberately erased memories, forced to rebuild from a lower technological starting point. Scenario 2. A natural catastrophe of immense scale, massive flooding, crustal displacement, or a cosmic event, buried the old world. A completely new population, possibly brought from elsewhere, was settled into the ruins with no knowledge of what came before. They were given a fabricated history to believe, never knowing they inherited rather than created. Scenario 3. A controlling elite deliberately reset the world to eliminate the free energy system. Why? Because free energy cannot be controlled. It cannot be metered, rationed, or sold. It grants independence, and independence is the enemy of control. So the old system was destroyed, the new population was given a controllable energy infrastructure, one requiring massive power plants, transmission lines, and meters in every home, and a false history was created to hide what was taken from humanity. Each scenario has supporting evidence. Each presents troubling implications about who we are and what world we actually inhabit. I cannot tell you with certainty which scenario is true, perhaps elements of all three combined, perhaps something even more complex occurred. But one thing is absolutely certain. The official story is insufficient. It leaves too many questions unanswered, too many contradictions unresolved, too much evidence ignored. And this brings us to the question that may be the most important of all. If our history has been rewritten, if we're living in cities built by someone else, if technology was stolen from us and replaced with an inferior, controllable version, what does that make us? Are we the descendants of the builders, suffering from imposed amnesia? Are we an entirely new species or population, placed here to inhabit a world we didn't create? Are we participants in an experiment we don't understand, living out roles in a script written by others? The architecture around us, silent and monumental, offers no clear answer, but it testifies to one undeniable truth. We are not who we think we are. Our past is not what we've been told, and the world we inhabit holds secrets far deeper than any official narrative acknowledges. This realization is not the end of the investigation, it's the beginning.
Because once you understand that history is a construct, you begin to question everything else. And that's when real awakening begins.
But let's go deeper, because this isn't just about buildings and history. This is about the nature of reality itself and your place within it. If history has been falsified, if entire civilizations have been erased and rewritten, then we must ask a more fundamental question. What if this world is not what it appears to be? What if Earth is not a home, but a testing ground? Not a destination, but a school where consciousness enters, experiences, learns, and evolves. Consider this. The old civilization that built these monuments perhaps reached the pinnacle of technological mastery. They conquered energy, architecture, possibly even fundamental forces of nature. But somewhere along the way, they failed a different kind of test. Perhaps they lost their humanity in pursuit of power. Perhaps they elevated technology while abandoning wisdom. And so, the reset came. The slate was wiped clean. We, the current civilization, are living through our own examination. But ours is different. We've been placed in a world of artificial scarcity, where energy must be purchased, where independence has been systematically eliminated. Our test is not technological advancement. Our test is this: can we awaken to truth while surrounded by lies? Can we recognize our chains while everyone insists we're free? Every false narrative, every controlled story, these are not obstacles. They are the test itself. The awakening happens through the process of seeing through deception. When you realize you've been lied to about history, you naturally begin to ask, what else is a lie? When you understand that free energy was stolen and replaced with a controllable version, you wonder, what else has been taken from humanity? These questions dismantle everything you thought you knew. But that dismantling is necessary. You cannot build truth on a false foundation. And here's what matters most. The truth is not something you're given. It's something you must claim. No authority will validate your awakening. You must do the work yourself, looking at evidence, thinking critically, trusting your own perception even when it contradicts official stories. The buildings stand as silent teachers, showing you that massive coordinated deception is possible, that entire histories can be fabricated. But they also show something hopeful, that truth persists. Evidence cannot be completely erased. The real story leaves traces for those willing to dig. So here's what I'm asking you to do. Go look at the old buildings in your city. Really look at them. Notice the proportions, the half-buried windows, the impossibly fitted stones, and ask yourself honestly, do I truly believe people with horses and hand tools built this? Trust your own perception. If something looks wrong, if the official explanation doesn't satisfy your logical mind, don't dismiss your doubts. Follow them. Investigate them. Your intuition is seeing what your conditioned mind has been trained to ignore. I'm not the authority on truth. No one is. The authority is the evidence itself and your own ability to reason through it. If this video has opened a door you didn't know existed, share your thoughts in the comments. What evidence do you see in your own environment? The conversation begins here. And if you want to continue questioning official narratives, subscribe to this channel. In the next video, we'll explore the free energy technology in detail, how it worked, why it was suppressed, and what it would mean if humanity reclaimed it today. Remember, history is not what's written in textbooks. History is what's carved in stone, visible all around you. You just have to learn how to read it. The buildings are speaking. The question is, are you ready to listen? Thank you for watching, and never stop questioning.